Back in 2014, Eidos Montreal would release a reboot of the popular stealth franchise Thief. The game was supposed to be a more modern, new version of the then relatively dated franchise. It was meant to reinvigorate some sort of excitement for the Thief series and get people back in the loop. Originally meant to be a fourth game in the franchise, it was later changed to be a complete reboot, and that reboot wasn't exactly the most well-loved in the world. I'll be fully transparent here, I never played any of the original games before I played Thief 2014. In fact, the only reason I got the Thief reboot was because it came in some 3-game stealth bundle for my Xbox 360. Now, fast forward a few years later and I wanted to play Thief just to see how it's like, but I really wanted a better experience than using my old 360, so I bought it over on Steam and gave the game a go. It's been quite a long time since Thief came out in 2014, but does it hold up in any capacity? It's a bit of a complicated question to ask because Thief has some genuinely good parts, but it also has its fair share of just downright bad parts too. Thief is about Garrett, a master thief who enjoys a good reputation at being good at what he does. The story starts us out with some tutorial work before we meet Aaron, who used to work with Garrett, sort of like Garrett's protege. The two take a job from a man named Bosco to steal something very important. Unfortunately, the situation goes haywire. Basically, a strange, religious-type looking ritual is meant to be taking place in the same building that they need to steal the object from, and this ritual involves some weird magic. Garrett wants to pull out of the mission, stating that of course it's far too risky. Erin digresses as she seems much more hot-headed and tries to enter the area anyways. However, her claw invention was stolen by Garrett earlier, and in a scuffle to get it back from him, the glass ceiling over the building breaks. Erin slips from Garrett's grasp and is basically absorbed in whatever ritual is happening below. Garrett then blacks out and wakes up in a cart that's being pulled into the city. By the way, the city in the game is literally just called the city. He's been in a coma for about an entire year. Apparently, a strange disease called the gloom is running rampant and killing lots of people. The city is a shell of its former self, and the Night Watch are clamping down hard on everyone. Ruled over by the tyrannical Baron, it seems like conditions are only getting bleaker in the city. Garrett tries to go back to business as usual, but with the new ruler, things aren't as easy as they always were before. Throughout the game, he attempts to figure out what happened that day he was knocked out and solve what happened to Aaron, leading him on a bit of a wild goose chase around the city to different locations, including an asylum and more. Along the way, Garrett uncovers a lot of secrets and strange happenings that are occurring in the city. To be quite honest, I thought the story was a bit weak in an overall sense. There were some nice elements here and there, but I didn't really feel so invested in the story much. I had more fun in the missions and the side jobs, but the story was mediocre at best. I liked Garrett as a character, and I thought it was cool that he was already a master thief from the very beginning of the story and that we wouldn't need to work our way up to being a master thief. Instead, you can just get right down to business, which is a neat thing about this game. I feel like his relationship with Aaron was probably the weakest aspect of the story because we're not really given much in terms of development between the two. I'm just supposed to accept that they've known each other for a long time, but Garrett's reactions to the fact that Aaron's basically dead are mild at best. I'm not sure if the writers were going for that on purpose or not, but it just felt a bit unrealistic in my opinion. I also felt like the other characters present around Garrett were okay, they had some good and unique qualities, but they could have been more developed. Though most of the game pretty much only revolves around Garrett and his adventure, so the other characters don't play much of a role in the overall gameplay. I think the integration of the story and the gameplay though was well balanced. There wasn't too much in terms of cutscenes, and the cutscenes that were there were pretty short, so they integrated with the gameplay in a good way. I think that a story-based game with too many cutscenes eventually just kind of becomes a bit of a walking simulator with some movie clips. One of the things that did annoy me was how easily Garrett just sort of accepted things that happened to him. Like, you'd think that when he figured out he basically had eagle vision or something, he'd be a bit more freaked out, maybe try to get an answer ASAP. Instead, he just kind of goes with it, which I guess maybe works for his character, but it does feel a bit disconnected from like how a typical human would react. Overall, the story was relatively decent, however it discards a lot of the things from the original Thief trilogy, which was a point of contention for a lot of longtime fans of the series. Garrett's original backstory is not present in this game, and in addition to this, there were some things hidden throughout the world that hint back to the original games, but this was pretty confusing because what's the plotline? Who's Garrett? Who isn't Garrett? That sort of a thing. It just kind of gets a little weird. Another issue I personally had with the story was the fact that many plot lines felt almost untouched in some way. Like, there was a point to something, and then the writers just sort of wrapped it up too fast for no reason. There were just some things in the story that felt like they were added because the writers wanted to add them, but they didn't really know like how to develop it fully. If you're going into this game thinking the story's going to be spectacular or anything, you might want to rethink that stance. However, if you're going into this game looking for the gameplay, you might be a bit more pleased on that front. Speaking of the gameplay, firstly, Thief promotes above all else stealth and evading combat. Pitting yourself into open combat is a terrible idea because Garrett doesn't really have unlimited health, he's no juggernaut. At the end of the day, this game isn't trying to be an assassin simulator. It's more like you're a thief that steals things, but you can stealthily defend yourself and take down opponents. Thief's gameplay relies on darkness and the preservation of that darkness. Light is your biggest enemy in Thief, and it can alert guards to your position almost immediately. You have a weapon, a tool called the claw, and a bow with some arrows, but for the most part you want to avoid getting into any sort of confrontation with all the guards. The more you can avoid, the better. There's also the basic weapon wheel, which includes a bow that you can use with a few different arrows. Each arrow type has its purpose and use. For example, the water arrows can put out fire and create a cover of darkness for you to avoid the guards with. The sawtoothed arrow is different and is used pretty much for lethal takedowns of your enemies. I found the arrows to actually be pretty useful, and they did help a lot in enhancing the gameplay. However, I didn't really use all of the arrows all the time. There's a reason for that. The way missions in Thief are designed allow for you to have a few avenues of choice in approaching them. There are some missions that are much more linear and scripted in nature. However, some missions do give you the freedom in approaching them from different areas by using different strategies. You can use the rope arrow to get up to a higher position, you can take out the guards, you can just run into the thick of it and get attacked on all sides. Pretty much whatever you think works for your playstyle, you have some leeway in that. A lot of missions will also leave things for you that you can use to your advantage to get guards distracted, for example. You can toss glass and alert guards to another location, which I would say is a pretty basic stealth mechanic, to be fair. You can set oil trails on fire, which may kill guards and distract them from the lit areas so you can sneak past them. There's a lot of little details like that that can enhance your approach. Guards do apparently know the potential hiding spots based off of how the AI was trained in this game, so even if you think you're safe from the guards, they may find you immediately because they'll assume certain places that you might be going to. I thought this was pretty neat. I personally like the stealth gameplay in Thief a lot, and it really satisfied my want for some hardcore stealth games. It's quite basic in its movement approach, so it's not really like Assassin's Creed level of movement where parkour is a huge focus of the gameplay. There is some level of parkour in Thief, but the parkour is more like keep your fingers pressed on 2 buttons max to jump over stuff. There were some interesting third-person parkour scenes that looked straight out of Assassin's Creed, which was a bit interesting, but felt a little disconnected, like we're in first person the whole time, but suddenly we're in third person for this one little parkour scene. I don't know, it wasn't that big of a deal, like it doesn't happen too much, but it was interesting. It's a little more advanced than Dishonored because Dishonored relies mostly on the magic to get you to move around and do the parkour basically part of it, so there's no magic in this game like there is in Dishonored, but the movement is somewhere between Dishonored and Assassin's Creed. So there is this sort of interesting magic-like system in Thief. You're not casting spells or anything like that, but you're using something that resembles eagle vision, which is called focus. This ability basically is eagle vision if we're being technical about it, as it turns everything but the important stuff into a dull faded color, while enemies are red and non-combatants or not enemies yet might be blue. That's pretty much it on that end. Thief also includes some puzzles in the mission design. A lot of missions rely on you solving puzzles and finding clues in order to discover and get to new locations or enter a new phase of the mission. The focus mechanic in this game really does come in handy with finding clues and hidden doors, and it's also useful for finding paths to take that you can use your bow or claw on. The combat in Thief is alright. This game is obviously not designed with combat as a main focus in mind because I really avoided the combat gameplay as much as possible. Hitting them a few times or one time, depending on your level, will stagger the guard and then you can long press to get a finishing move. Obviously, this game isn't designed to be combat first, so definitely don't go into it playing it this way. It won't be a fun experience. The bow and arrows are still part of the combat, just in a more stealth way. You pretty much can only effectively get a kill with those if you are from a distance, hidden, and able to line up a shot really well. In terms of movement, you have a basic crouch mechanic, then you can sprint. Climbing and parkour-like movements are done again just by sprinting and is something automatic. There's also a bit of a cover dash that you can use while you're crouched. It's a great mechanic to use for getting from cover to cover in order to stay in the darkness where you can't be spotted. Thief includes some QuickTime events as well, like when you're opening windows. There's lockpicking, which is pretty easy to figure out how to do and can net you some interesting things as well. One of the things that didn't really make much sense in the gameplay was stealing random stuff from around the map like spoons. I mean, yeah, there needs to be some sort of economy system to buy refills of your equipment, but for a master thief, you'd think that Garrett would be more focused on stealing more important things than ornate spoons or scissors. But I do kind of like being able to go into any room and just like open drawers and check for stuff, so I guess it's kind of fun, but a little interesting, I don't know. While you sneak around, you can also peek through keyholes, take cover behind posts or walls, and have to evade things like glass or vases that are placed around a certain location in order to avoid alerting enemies. Some enemies are stronger than others, which makes total sense, so being careful around those is really important. I thought the level design in this game was okay, it was pretty good. I mean, some of the levels were very interesting and unique to explore. There was an integration of puzzles, but some of those puzzles could be a little confusing, like annoyingly confusing. Some of the map placement also was a bit weird, like a lot of really confusing avenues and routes and needing to run around not realizing that you missed something. It wasn't too bad, but it wasn't my favorite. I also think the overall visual tone of this game adds a lot onto the gameplay. The city is a bleak and overall dark place, as is pretty customary with games of this nature. I personally pay attention a lot to if a game can do this part right, but I'll talk more on this a little later. There's a system called focus points as well, which is basically ways that you can upgrade the focus mechanic. You can do this by acquiring gold and then going to the Queen of Beggars, which is this old lady, and you can get focus points at her place. You can also get them through gameplay, but it's way easier and faster to get focus points from the Queen of Beggars. Focus points enhance the focus mechanic through things like allowing you to see handprints on objects to determine where things to steal are, so you're not just wasting time opening every drawer, or you can also see footstep sound waves so that you can tell where an enemy is. This is just an interesting way to enhance that stealth gameplay aspect of Thief. There's obviously a lot more skills that you can acquire for the focus through these focus points, but these are just some of the ones that I personally saw were pretty interesting. I actually quite enjoyed the gameplay elements in Thief. I think its stealth gameplay is really its most glowing and shining element because it's actually pretty fun to sneak around and find new routes to explore a mission in. The AI is pretty rough in this game though, I won't lie. They detect you sometimes in the weirdest of places and then they don't detect you other times. The way they're just aimlessly running around is also pretty silly too. As long as you're not engaging in open combat, the AI issues are pretty hard to notice, but they're still present in some capacity. I'm not saying that the AI is absolutely downright terrible, but it's certainly not the greatest I've ever seen in a video game. Although the overall gameplay wasn't the most advanced or the most sophisticated, I liked it nonetheless. I also found it interesting to explore all the different ways to take down guards. For the most part, I would say Thief's stealth gameplay is pretty fun.
Sounds like a good read. Where'd they take Basso? To the keep, but it's well guarded. You can't just walk in the door. That's good. I'm not a big fan of doors.
Thief is a game that appealed to me a lot from the visual style of it. When I first played it, I was instantly intrigued by the game because of how interesting it was shaping up to be. The world of Thief is a dark and mysterious one and has an almost bleak, sad, and depressing feeling to it. Similar to Dunwall in Dishonored, most of the streets in Thief are relatively empty, bar the guards and a few NPCs conversing with one another here and there. There are many hidden locations throughout Thief, such as windows you can open to find items to steal within. Listening in on some conversations will point out locations for some interesting high-value loot. There are hidden details in Thief and a good amount of things to read that reveal stuff about the world. I can tell that there are many influences on the city in Thief, including Victorian, steampunk, and a bit of a gothic flair. Plus, most of the gameplay occurs in the dark and at night, which means that this dreary, almost dystopian city feels even drearier and more dystopian, which is certainly a positive. There's a good amount of ambient noise as you're playing though, which I think does give the city some level of life in it despite the disease. However, this gloom plague is sort of not really visible for most of the game, which honestly, that's a waste. Unlike in Dishonored, where the plague was present, visible, and threatening to Corvo, the gloom is just kinda there in Thief. It feels almost like it's just a set piece. It doesn't really show much in the world, which was weird to me. It really killed that part of the story in my opinion. The sound design is also pretty bad in this game, which was irritating. Sound just doesn't work right in the way that you'd expect it to in Thief. For one, you get these issues where Garrett's speech is like illegible. Even if you just turn down the other sounds, like his talking is so quiet sometimes it's ridiculous. The sound is 100% imbalanced. As I was researching the game to write this review, I found out that this was Eidos Montreal's second game only. So for a relatively newer studio at the time, this was an impressive game. It's not the best game I've ever played in my life or anything like that, and there were still a lot of flaws in its overall execution, but it does do justice in terms of being a fun stealth game. If you're someone like me and you enjoy stealth games a lot and you like the sort of atmosphere that Thief delivers, then I think this game works very well for you. But I would personally wait for a discount, which is what I did for the Steam version, because it's a bit of an old game at this point. I heard complaints about some of the more action-y sequences in this game being too high of a contrast to the stealth gameplay, but I don't know, I think from an overall standpoint, I can't really say that I didn't like this game because that would be a lie. I've spent quite a while playing this game, and I would most likely replay the game a few more times just as I did with Dishonored. So numerically, as I always give a numerical score at the end, I'd give this game around a 7.5 out of 10. I think the story's quality bumped the score down the most since I liked the gameplay a lot more. The side missions are fun though, which is great. And with that being said, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on the Thief reboot. Don't forget to check out our website for gaming news, reviews, entertainment, and more. The link to that is in the description below alongside all our other important links. And I'll see you all in the next video.